corner. You'll have your learning target throughout the whole lesson right here at the bottom of the screen in this purple box, and then I'm just going to work through the slides. So in order for us to understand the boom, meaning the height of the 1920s, and the bust, meaning the bottom of the Great Depression, we need to have some basic understanding of economics. And this is going to help you not just to understand what we're talking about here, but to understand our economy in general, and then you'll be ahead of the game for economics next year. So we are going to work through this essential question, and it's our learning target 2. Summarize how. And then this is the question. So how do GDP, unemployment, and inflation interact to create the business cycle? And you'll have a better understanding about what all of those terms mean, hopefully in about 10 minutes. So I want you to start by just thinking about this question. Or bad. What do you base your judgment on? What criteria, what data do you use? And what would you compare our current economy right here, right now in 2020? Is it a good economy or a bad economy? So we're going to look at how the cycle of business is always up and down, and how we can maybe better understand the economy in order to apply it to the past and to the present. We have what's called a free market. That means that we decide as consumers what we want to buy, and the producers decide what they want to produce. And this relationship back and forth where we come to an understanding about what the price ought to be. If the price is too high, people don't buy it. If the price is too low, it's not profitable. So there's this given failure. It's where things just aren't working the way that they're supposed to. And we're going to look at how the Great Depression was a market failure. In order to understand how all of this functions, we need to look back at what people thought about economics at the time. And the big guy, the main guy, his name was John Maynard Keynes. And he came up with this idea that we call Keynesian economics. You don't need to know that, but it's helpful to understand. And it creates this little interplay here, and I have this kind of step-by-step here for you. If people don't have money, businesses don't make stuff. If businesses don't make stuff, they have to lay people off. So that means unemployment goes up. When unemployment goes up, there's less money in the economy. So unemployment up, money supply down. When the money supply goes down, people have less money to buy stuff. That causes a decrease in GDP. When GDP goes down, unemployment keeps going up. When unemployment goes up, we have less money, and it creates this cycle that ends up with the market has gotten to a point where it can't correct itself. And there was an idea, especially in American economics during this period, that we should let the economy do its own thing. Keep your hands off and just let it regulate itself. The market fixes itself. The problem is that in 1929, we got to a point where the market could not regulate itself. So the New Deal, which is FDR's plan to fix the economy after the Great Depression, he applies a lot of the role of government in a totally new way. Keynes would say, just give money to people, a stimulus, which is actually what the government's about to do right now here in 2020. They're going to give each family a little bit of money just so that it stimulates the economy, because when you have money, you spend money. When you spend money, businesses make money and you get what you want. So it's good for everybody. Here, during the New Deal, which we're going to talk about on Monday, uses the power of the presidency to step in to regulate the economy in a way that it hadn't been used before. People felt at the time that the economy should be left alone. When the economy is left alone, this is what it does. So the economy is constantly shifting. Even minute to minute, the economy is shifting and changing. And we run through cycles of expansion, where the economy is growing, right here. Eventually you come to a peak where you just can't expand anymore. And then we drop into what's called a recession. Expansions and recessions are normal. They're normal parts of the business cycle. The problem is when you expand past the point where you probably should be expanding, it drops down. It will drop down to where it should normally be. And that's where it becomes a depression. Here you're seeing this really important word that we're going to keep coming back to, which is credit. Credit is money that you borrow to use now that you owe back later with interest. Credit cards, a mortgage to buy a house, student loans, all of that stuff is credit. And you're spending money that you don't actually have. When we do that, we're artificially inflating the economy. So that's what we saw in the 1920s. Credit became normalized. When they owed, they couldn't pay it back. And then we drop into this cycle here. I'm going to move through each of these three ideas. We're going to start by looking at GDP, which is gross domestic product. It means gross like in total. Domestic meaning within the country, product meaning stuff that's made. And we use GDP to understand the value of economic activity within a country. High GDP good, low GDP bad. I'm going to take a look at this graph. So this is using year 2000 dollars, and I don't want you to get hung up on that. So don't worry so much about what the dollars say. I want you to look at the picture as a whole. And what we should be seeing is GDP that follows this happy straight line, okay? It shows steady growth. It looks good. As long as GDP is going up, everything is fine. However, the GDP per capita, which is the way that we break down to understand each person, is on this kind of crazy roller coaster ride from 1928 until 1942. Why do you think after World War II begins, GDP goes up? Why do you think when we're looking at the Great Depression beginning, why do you think it isn't just a straight line down? So I want you to be thinking about how this picture is trying to show you how the economy is traveling using GDP, okay? So this is showing us that production was here, it went up a little bit, it went down, it kind of tapered off, it went way down, it came up, it goes up and down a little bit, and then once World War II begins, the economy really starts to take off. And I'm not going to give you the answer, I just want you to think about it. Between 1929 and 1933, globally, the GDP decreased by almost 27%. So we think about the Great Depression as being this event that has this huge ripple effect throughout the American economy. It changes all kinds of social changes and cultural changes and economic changes in the United States, but it isn't just that. So many other investors had their money in the American stock market that the Great Depression and the stock market crash in the United States causes a huge ripple effect throughout the rest of the world. Next, we're going to look at unemployment. And we're going to look at unemployment from a very basic level. It's the number or the percentage of people who are not employed. Now, being unemployed refers to a lot of people who aren't working. But not all of the people who aren't working count as being unemployed. We're not going to get into like who's employed and how and all of that stuff. You're going to do that next year in economics. We are going to just talk about what unemployment as a number looks like. So here we're going to look at the unemployment rate. This is from 1930. So this is starting just after the stock market crash, which takes place in October of 1929. Take a look. High unemployment is bad. That means there's more people without jobs. Low unemployment is good. And there's actually a sweet spot for unemployment. It's something like 3%. And that's because there's all kinds of different unemployment in the way that it's calculated. Unemployment peaked at about 25% during the Great Depression. So that means that 25% of eligible workers were not able to find work. If people cannot find work, they cannot feed their families. When we look at how the bust impacts regular Americans, which is on Friday, we're going to look at how different types of goods and different social services, safety net services provided by the government, tried to step in. If you look at 1933, right here, 25%, this tells us a couple of different things. If GDP is connected to unemployment, which we know that it is, it's telling us that businesses aren't producing. If businesses aren't producing, people aren't buying the stuff. If people aren't buying the stuff, it's because they don't have money. And if they don't have money, it's because they don't have jobs at a company that's producing. And again, it creates this cycle. When we look at GDP, you'll see that it closely matches, number to number, the ups and downs of unemployment. So what is the difference between a recession and a depression? Recessions are pretty short. Sometimes the economy is just a little slow. And that's perfectly normal. It's where things start to get out of control, especially with inflation, that we start dealing in using the word depression. So we've talked about, if you had me last year for World, if you had Mr. Engels, I know you guys talked about this, in Germany after World War I, hyperinflation, where the value of currency was so low that it was actually more economical to burn money than it was to buy firewood. So the idea here is that the price of goods goes up, but the value of the currency isn't keeping up. When we're looking at how to move out of a recession, we usually will deal with inflation. So if inflation is low, people buy more because the dollar's worth more, so you can buy more stuff. Businesses are able to pay workers, employment goes up, everyone's happy, everyone's producing, everyone's buying. And we move out of that recession into expansion. And then we're back on that business cycle where everything is always up and down. It's when you get trapped in the down that it moves from being a recession to being a depression. We measure inflation by using what's called a market basket of goods. And this is calculated all the time in order to figure out what inflation is. And you can look at all of the things that are included in that market basket. So they basically figure out, what does the average family buy? They look across the nation, what is the average price for those goods? Milk, bread, eggs, cereal, baby formula, diapers, fuel, and they will calculate how much that price has changed. So by doing that, we're able to calculate inflation. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because we're going to do a quick little activity with this. So on your computer, I want you to go to this web address, and I'm going to pop it in on mine so that you can follow along. You guys know, because you have me, that I am addicted to Starbucks. So if I know my coffee is something like, we'll call it $5.25. So if in 2020 it cost me $5.25, I'm going to pop in here. Let's do 1920. $5.25 using this inflation rate in all of these calculations. A coffee from Starbucks, if it had existed, would have been 41 cents. If we pop this up to 1929, that price went up. That tells us something. Tells us that inflation is rising. Then, if we go to 1930, it starts dropping off. And by 1933, it has dropped back down. If we pop in 1940, things have lowered and become a little bit more stable. I'm going to use apples as the other good because this is something that you're going to look at on Friday. Selling apples became a way for unemployed people to make income. Those of you who saw Newsies or were in Newsies, it's kind of the same idea of the newspapers where you had to buy them up front and then you sell them and then you make the profit in between. In 1929, an apple was 5 cents. Today, that's 76 cents. Take a look at that 1929, if it was 5 cents. In 1930, it stays the same. 1933, it drops. But when we're looking at how prices change over time, it has a lot to do with the way that we understand the value of a good. Is an apple really worth 5 cents? If I went to the store today and an apple were 5 cents, I think that's a great deal. If I went to the store today and the apple was 75 cents, I think that was a good deal too. The way that we understand prices has everything to do with the way that we see the way that everything functions, and the way that we put value in money. I'm going to close with this idea. What does any of this have to do with the 20s or the Great Depression? Everything. And here's why. The Great Depression starts after the stock market crash. And I want you to take a look at this image in a second. So on October 29th, 1929, the stock market crashed. It was called Black Tuesday. Overall GDP worldwide is going to drop off. Inflation is going to explode. And it shows here, if you can take a look, this is the 20s, right? Everything is, for the most part, expanding, expanding, expanding. Now you'll notice that there's little peaks and little valleys because all of that is perfectly normal. But then take a look. It falls way off. This is the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And if your parents listen to the news or you ever have the news on at night, they're talking about this. They talk about the numbers of the Dow every day. And it is a selection of stocks that are used to judge the strength of the stock market as a whole. When the Dow Jones is doing well, people feel confident, buyers feel good, you buy more stuff, you don't sell off your stocks. When the numbers are dropping, people get nervous, they sell off their stocks, they don't want the market to crash and have all of their money be tied up in it. So the reason why the stock market is the catalyst for the Great Depression is because so much money was tied up in it due to credit. So this idea back here where people were buying with money that they didn't have, and they were investing in the stock market trying to make that money back. When everything drops, they drop too. So I know that this is a lot of information, and it's a lot of really heavy information about the stock market, but what I want you to consider is this. Is the economy doing well? What do you base your judgment on? What kind of criteria do you use? And these are questions that are going to help us understand the 20s and the Great Depression, and it will help you, hopefully, it will help you to better understand today's economy as well. And for our assessment for this unit, you're going to be asked to compare the economy of then to the economy of now. So take the time to go through these slides. Make sure that you understand GDP, unemployment, and inflation. Create this relationship between the three of them, which is the business cycle. And make sure you have an understanding of how, when things expand too far, boom eventually is going to have to go bust. So as we are looking through this unit and as we're moving forward in this unit, I want you to make sure that you're thinking about these three ideas, constantly be coming back to them in your mind. Be aware of, in the unit guide, where you need to jot down these key ideas. Email me with questions. Please let me know anytime.